Hey guys, my name is Ethan, this is Carberra. Welcome to the series where I teach you how to code in Python. Today we are talking about collection types, so we're going to be talking about tuples, lists, dictionaries, sets, and briefly generators. However, generators aren't really basics in my opinion, but again, it's another thing where I want you to know that they exist because they will be useful in the future. So we're going to start with tuples. Actually, we're going to start with lists because tuples have some weird properties to them. So a list is pretty much how you would define an array in a lot of other languages, and it is quite simply a list of elements. So if we have L, for example, we can have a list of 1, 2, and 3. And L is now a list of integers, so we can have 1, 2, 3. We're not limited to a specific type either, so you can have L, we can have M equals string 3, I typed 4, but never mind, and 6.7. And you have just this list of string 4 and 6.7, just 3 entirely different data types. If we were to do type L, it's just say class list, type M, just say class list. It doesn't necessarily matter. So that is the basics of a list. I am actually going to talk about tuples next because they are probably the next least complicated thing, even though they do have some weird properties to them. So you can have a tuple, which is basically the same thing, but with brackets. So you can see here, T is with brackets 1, 2, and 3. The main difference between lists and tuples is that tuples are what's called immutable. So you can't add or remove elements from a tuple once it's been instantiated. With a list, you can. You can add and remove elements to your heart's content. But tuples are fixed. Tuples are also a lot more lightweight. So if you're not going to be adding or removing stuff to or from your collection, then use a tuple rather than a list because they are significantly lighter and they're also significantly more efficient as well. But of course, lists very much do have their purpose. The slightly weird properties I was talking about are that tuples do not require the brackets. So having y, for example, a 1, 2, 3 is valid. If you do y, it will appear as brackets down here. That's because it's just kind of a weird quirk of the Python syntax as a whole, where brackets aren't really necessary in any situation. And this adds some weird complexity to stuff. So say if we had y again as a one element tuple. You think that y would be a one element tuple, right? Well, oh, it's just 1. Wait, what? What if we do this? You see, it's an integer, not a tuple. Because, again, the brackets... Honestly, brackets are a bit more of a whim in Python than anything else. And this just sees it as an integer. If you want it as a tuple, you have to have a trailing comma. So you have to have this trailing comma here for it to register as a tuple because it is now a one element tuple. You can see there we have 1 in the trailing comma. Type Y is a tuple. So don't forget about the trailing commas when you're doing stuff. But you only need to worry about that if it's a one element tuple. It is a weird quirk in the language. Theoretically speaking, there aren't many instances where you're going to have one element tuples anyway, so it does make sense. But just note that this is a thing you have to do. This is a thing you can do, but you really shouldn't do. Because it's not particularly readable. You should do what T did instead and have the brackets around it if you're doing a tuple. Yeah, those are just some weird quirks about the Python syntax as a whole. So next thing we're going to talk about is sets. You're realistically not going to use sets a huge amount. They are more for set operations, and there are a few other uses for them as well, but I'll get to those when we're talking about converting between different types, like we did in the first episode. We had that little segment for that. So a set is defined with some curly braces or curly brackets or whatever you want to call them. And you could just do 1, 2, and 3, and then you have a set that is just 1, 2, and 3. It's simple enough to understand. It works most of the same way as a list. You can add and remove stuff. However, sets do also have some extra properties to them. I'm not going to go over those in the basics. But one thing I will mention about sets is that they have to be unique. So for example, if I would do set 1, 2, 3, 1, 4, and 5. So we have 2 1s in there. We actually display the set. We'll see that it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because sets can only have one of each thing, it removed the second one from the set. So that is something to keep in mind. Next thing I'm going to talk about is dictionaries. Now, You're going to use dictionaries more than you're going to use sets, but I wanted to talk about sets first because dictionaries also use curly braces, which can be a bit confusing at first, but the syntax is very different. So, for example, you can have 1 in here, and then 2, 2, and then 3. And then this is a set. However, to convert it to a dictionary, you use the colon, and then you have a 1 in here. So a dictionary in itself is a key value pair. It is, if you think of a dictionary, you have the word, and then you have the definition of the word next to it. A dictionary in Python is no different. So you have the object. It doesn't have to be a string. It can be an integer, or it can be a float, or an object, or pretty much anything you want. There are some objects that don't work with it, but most of the standard ones do. And then you have your definition. So in my case, I'm defining a string of 1 as the number 1, and then I can do the same thing here, and the same thing here. If I print D, you'll see we have our 1 here, which is 1, 2, which is 2, and 3, which is 3. So that is a dictionary. Dictionaries are very slow in Python, but they are really rather useful. There are other ways of getting around the slowness, but for the purposes of the basics, we're just going to use the dictionaries for now because it's not going to matter too much at this stage. And then the final thing that I want to talk about briefly are generators. So generators sort of have the same syntax as tuples, but when you iterate through a tuple, it treats it as a generator more than anything else. When you iterate through a list, you create the entire list in one go, and you iterate through each element one by one. A generator is very much the same, however, it just creates a generator object, and as you iterate through the generator, it actually creates the next value in the list when it needs to. So this is a process called lazy computation, and Python utilizes this very, very well. I can't really show generators off at the moment because they are really only used when you're iterating through something, and we're going to go through iterations or like while and for loops in a later video. But again, this is just one of those things. I want you to know that generators exist, but you don't need to understand them at this stage. So now that that's out of the way, we are actually going to start converting between different types. So you have your tuple, you have your list, you have your dict, and you have your set built-in functions. So for example, if you do a tuple of a list like that, it will turn it into a tuple. If you do it in a list of a tuple, it will return it as a list. If you did a list of a if you did a list of a dictionary, it would just have this quite. Is this a good example? Not sure, but you'll see it just takes the keys. So it takes the bit before the colon, so the 1, the 3, and the 5, and then squash down into a list. There are ways of getting the values out as well, but I'll talk about those probably a little bit later. You can't convert a list into a dictionary or tuple into a dictionary specifically, probably because it doesn't have key value pairs. However, you can do a set of something. So say if you have 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 5, you have that as a list, and you just want to get rid of all the duplicates, you can do it as a set. And you can even convert that then back into a list if you need to. But the set method it's just really useful for getting rid of duplicates out of a collection. And if you need it back into a list, of course, you can do that as well. So next thing I'm going to talk about really quickly before we end this video is appending to and removing from lists and dictionaries. So you have your list, so we're going to have L, which is an empty list, as you can see, an empty list, and we're going to append something to it. So we could do L.append 5. If you do that now, you can see that our list L now has one element of 5. It just has the 5 in there, and we can continue adding stuff. So we could do append 7, and then append hello. And you can see our 7 and our hello are now there. In the same way that you can remove elements, so you can remove the 7, and the 7 is gone. If something isn't there when you try and remove it, it will throw an error. So just keep that in mind. When it comes to dictionaries, so we're going to create a new dictionary. Well, this is actually, I'm not actually sure if it knows what. Okay, so it instantiates it as a dictionary straight up. So to make a set, you would have to do that. To add stuff to our dictionary, we can use the update. So we do have to kind of merge two dictionaries together here. So you could do d.update and then create a new dictionary saying 1 is 2 or something like that. If you have d, you can see that 1 is 2. There is actually a new operator in Python 3.9 that can do it for us. So I believe it's this. I've never really actually used this before. As you can see, well, actually, bd. Let's add something new. So it's the pipe and then the equals, and then 3, 4. Yeah, d. There we go. It adds it to it. So this is kind of like a merge equals. There is also the merge, which is just a pipe that can merge two dictionaries together. So say 5, 6, and then merge 7, 8, and you have these things together. So you can do this dot update, or you can use this pipe equals, whichever you feel is more clean and usable. I actually kind of prefer the pipe equals. I think that's a lot cleaner. It's a lot easier to work out what's going on than this weird update with these with a function call and all this. I believe this is faster as well because it's an operator rather than a function call. I could be wrong. And in the same way as you have your remove from list, you also have a pop from dictionary. So we can do d.pop, and then I think we just pass the key. Yeah, there we go. So we can take, so we can do a pop of 3, which is the key, whichever one it is. It's this one here, and it actually returns out the value. So d.pop 3 would actually return 4. If you do d now, you can see that there's 1 and 2. So that's how to remove stuff from the dictionary. You don't pass in the key value page, you just pass in the key. So that should just about do it for the basics of collection types. I would recommend kind of experimenting with this just to get an idea. But yeah, for now, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below, or you can join the Discord server using the link in the description. While you're down there, I'd recommend you check out my socials. So I have Facebook, I have my Twitter, I have my library, and I have my new Twitch where I do streams and stuff, and feel free to follow me on there if you want to. But that's going to do it for this video. If you liked it, then say hello down below. If you really liked it, consider subscribing and hit a notification bell so you don't miss out on future uploads. And if you really, really liked it, then consider supporting me on Patreon. Of course, you don't have to. It would be a really cool thing of you to do. With that in mind, I'd like to thank my awesome patrons for the support, and I'll see you next time when we talk about accepting input from a user.